Now, with export growth under threat and GDP targets revised down, the Marcos administration faces growing pressure to rebalance the economy and rebuild confidence. To give us a macro snapshot ahead of the SONA, we're joined by RCBC's chief economist, Mike Ricafort. Hi, Mike. Good morning, and thank you for being here with us.
Good morning, Mikey, and your viewers.
I'm here with my co-host, former BIR Commissioner Kim Henares. I guess I'll get the ball rolling with the first question. Mike, we're halfway through the Marcos administration. Taking a look at the big picture, how would you say our economic managers are performing at this junction?
Yeah, good morning also to Ms. Kim Henares and to everyone. So far, our economic data, we have seen some slowdown in economic growth. First quarter GDP at 5.4%. That's a bit slower than expected. And also, we have seen the downward revisions by the multilateral agencies because of primarily because of Trump's tariffs and the trade wars. No, and it used to be like 6% target for this year and next year. Now it's down to like almost 5.5%. So that's a cut of about 50 basis points by the likes of World Bank, ADB, IMF, and the other credit rating agencies. Well, primarily because Trump's trade wars would slow down exports around the world, including ours, and it would also slow new investments, expansion plans, because there's still uncertainty as to the inventories, the production capacity, and the expansion plans of the various exporters. It's going to slow down also the employment in the global supply chains, and thereby reducing global economic growth and indirectly slowing down the Philippine economic growth. So that's external in nature, the slowdown, but nonetheless, the Philippines is still among the fastest growing economies in ASEAN and Asia after Vietnam, and we have favorable demographics to support, meaning to say that well, the country has been on the 10th year on the demographic sweet spot, meaning to say majority of our population already at working age. Our population is the 12th largest in the world at more than 114 million with an average age of below 25. So it's relatively young, the youngest after Indonesia's population and the second largest also after Indonesia. So the country has been growing like even prior to the pandemic. From 2012 to 2019, it has been growing at least 6%. Had it not been for higher inflation over the past 3 years triggered by the Russia-Ukraine war and also, well, the Trump factor, our economic growth would have grown already by at least 6%. And, that's a product of the favorable demographics. Imagine more than half of the Filipinos are already they can already work, more than 50 million Filipinos, and they would earn income, they have spending power, they would some of
This
them would
is
start families, they would also
press meeting
they would
billionaire.
purchase homes, purchase vehicles, they would shop, they would travel. That's why we're among the fastest growing economies in the region right now, and we're the last to enter that demographic sweet spot. We entered that since 2015. And other countries were much earlier than us. Like Japan was in 1965. It was 50 years earlier than us. Hong Kong and Singapore was 1980. And South Korea, 1985. China, 1990. Other ASEAN countries were earlier by 10 to 15 years. So now it's the moment of the Philippines. That's why it's very important for us to have, to take advantage of this favorable demographics, because, our markets are very much attractive from the point of view of global companies, like the biggest automaker in the world.
Yeah, Mike, I'm going to have to ask you to hold that thought. We have a question from my co-host, Kim Henares. Go ahead.
I have a question because we keep on saying we are in the sweet spot for in our population, no? But how do you address the mismatch, no? Because most of the laborer are minimum wage. They're not. We didn't unlock productivity. So how would you would you advise the government to do to address this mismatch?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think she means, our growth looks good on paper.
Yeah.
But when you go out to the streets and you see things, it paints a very different picture. How do you reconcile that, Mike?
Yeah, true. Actually, those are the so-called gaps. That's the potential growth of the economy. This is now the moment of the Philippines to on a catch-up mode, so to speak. So there are still gaps in the likes of infrastructure, gaps on, the productivity of the population. Some of the global banks, they're of the view that the Philippine economy could potentially go up in terms of ranking. Now, the current rank last year was number 33 in the world. So there's that mismatch. True. You can see that on the ground. We have the 12th largest population, and yet our GDP is just number 33 in the world. Though that already improved. The year prior to that, it was number 34. 2 years prior to that, it was number 38. And some of the global banks, especially those the one that coined the term BRICS, that invented that term, the meaning Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, well, the Philippines could catapult to number 15 potentially, to number 20. That would be the next 15 to 20 biggest economies in the world. Currently, we're number 33, so that would be around 20 notches higher from where we are. So there's that mismatch, yes. That's why it's very important the way they see it. What would be the timeline? When would this all happen?
Yeah.
For us, it would be 2050 to 2075. So we have to be kind of patient about it.
Yeah.
So
Another
at least
glaring
25
thing,
years
Mike.
from now, and uh, so therefore, in the interim, so there's a need to, well, the potential is there. Yes, education is the biggest equalizer. That's why the biggest budget allocation. This would be one of the usual SONA items. Education is the biggest budget allocation because, well, now, of course, most especially STEM courses that's needed by the world. You look at the, well, look at the, at least the favorable metrics that would suggest that. For OFW remittances, the Philippines is number 4 in the world, $40 billion. So, in an aging world population, the Philippines sends its workers abroad. And for BPOs, we're number 2 in the world after India. It's earning $40 billion. And we're number 1 in contact center or customer service. That's 70 to 80%. That's a subset of the BPO. India is number 1 in BPO, but when it comes to customer service, they cannot beat the Philippines. The global companies, whenever they outsource, they want the best for their customers. And
Mike,
sometimes it starts with the welcoming culture, of course, the accent
Mike,
that can be
Mike,
understandable.
can I
Go
ask
ahead.
a question? Because in the big beautiful bill of Trump, there's a 1% tax for remittance. How do you think it will affect the remittances that we're getting? Because the U.S. is the major remittance market that we receive, no? So there's going to be a 1% tax on this. So how will it affect us?
Well, yeah, well, that's a very good point, Commissioner Kim. Well, especially now, yeah, that's been the feedback. At least 1% tax with the one big beautiful bill signed by Trump on the 4th of July. That's about more than 2 weeks ago, and yeah, that's going to slow down remittances because they have to pay up. Although it's kind of minimal and negligible. But what would otherwise be spent by OFWs, their families, most especially their dependents, would go to the coffers of the U.S. government in the form of taxes. And what would otherwise have been spent for basic commodities, food, uh, the utilities like electricity, phone bill, shopping, and many other things. So that's taken something that's 1% taken away from our economy, and it's gonna slow down a bit because it's gonna be paid by our OFWs based in the U.S., especially if they're non-residents, and it's gonna cut what would otherwise be enjoyed by the families
Mike,
here,
I
or
want to
maybe
ask you
yeah. Go ahead.
one more question. We don't have that much time. The national debt. That's another thing we wanted to focus on. Our debt and our fiscal strategy. The national debt is at a record 17 trillion pesos. What are your thoughts on this? And what's the fiscal strategy, the most prudent fiscal strategy to trim this?
Yeah, that's one of the actually, if there's priority items that needs to be focused on, well, especially this is a multi-year thing. Now, the debt to GDP ratio is, it's more than 60%. The international threshold is 60%. And we have seen pronouncements recently that, you know, locally, according to the Malacanang, the threshold from their point of view is would be
Wala na.
around 70%. And, the debt has been rising. Like prior to the pandemic, it was a little less than 7 trillion pesos. Now it's almost 17 trillion. It's 16.9 trillion. So it has been, prior to the pandemic, it has been rising less than 500 billion pesos per year, like somewhere between 300 billion to 400 billion pesos per year. Now the pandemic came, well, everybody else around the world had a similar dilemma because of slower economies and the need to give that slow down tax collections and the need to spend for stimulus, for assistance programs, various. And, suddenly by 2020, 2021, 2022 per year, it was 2 trillion suddenly. It ballooned. It's like more than 4 to 5 times higher than the typical year. And thereafter, around 2023, 2024, it's like a little less than around 1.3 to 1.4 trillion. It's kind of big. It's still like almost 3 times compared to the pre-pandemic increments. But of course, we need to acknowledge the fact that now the government may be also be starting to service the debts incurred during the pandemic. Just like next month, there's a 5-year retail treasury bond maturing worth 516 billion, 5-year tenor, 5 years ago, and it's going to mature August 12th. So those kinds of debts would need to be will be serviced already. And the key metrics to look at, of course, the share of the debt servicing in the national budget. The latest data that came out is a little over 14%. The critical point, it was 20 years back when the debt to GDP ratio was more than 70%. That was really the time to come up with fiscal and tax reform measures, meaning to say, intensifying tax collections. A good thing Commissioner Henares is here with us, and it's running after tax cheats, using existing tax laws, maximizing everything to ensure we sustain the recurring sources of tax revenue collections of the government. That's on the revenue side. And on the expenditure side, of course, more disciplined spending, anti-corruption, anti-leakage, anti-wastage. So,
Okay, Mike,
back then,
one last question. We've got to wrap this up.
very serious.
As an
It was
economist,
taken very, very seriously.
Mike, one last question. Time is tight. As an economist, what would you like to hear from the president in today's SONA? Maybe just enumerate some things really quickly.
Yeah, so it's really the reform measures, continuing with this on the fiscal side. 3 different administrations, 3 previous economic teams, they're very consistent about, conservatism on ensuring that the government sustains the recurring tax revenue collections. And, the last resort would still be new taxes, higher tax rates. And, of course, there are still other reform measures like the right sizing of the government that would also try to rein in on the more in terms of more disciplined government spending and boosting the productivity of the government, because other than education, the other biggest equalizer would be technology. That's one of the key essences of the right sizing of the government, is to boost the productivity using the best technologies. And same goes with the rest of the government, to further digitize and reduce costs in the process, and further boosting the output per person and the overall productivity of the government. And that would
Mike,
effectively eliminate wastages and narrow the deficit and curb the growth in the debt of the country.
Thank you so much, Mike Ricafort, Chief Economist of RCBC Bank.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and to your viewers.